The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Park Innovations headquarters like it was trying to break in, mirroring the storm raging inside Emily Thompson as she sat frozen in the HR conference room on the 17th floor. The words from Sarah, the soft-spoken, silver-haired HR director, still echoed in her skull, sharp and impossible. "I'm truly sorry, Ms. Thompson, but we cannot move forward with your application at this time. Our records indicate that Mrs. Park is already employed here in a consulting capacity." Emily's fingers went numb around the edges of her leather portfolio, the one she'd bought secondhand because new ones felt like a luxury she no longer deserved. Mrs. Park. The title sliced through 2 years of deliberate detachment, 2 years of rebuilding herself brick by painful brick under the plain, unremarkable name Thompson. She had walked into this gleaming tower this morning believing she was finally taking control, applying for the senior AI integration developer role on her own merit. No husband, no history, just her code and her hunger for stability. Now the room spun slowly, the abstract blue and silver mural on the wall blurring into waves that threatened to pull her under. She managed a strangled, "There must be some mistake," but the words came out thin, barely audible over the rain. Sarah tilted her head with professional sympathy, tapped a few keys, turned the monitor slightly so Emily could see the employee database entry glowing in soft corporate font. Emily Park, special consultant to the CEO, hired date 2 years and 3 months ago, status active, compensation deposited monthly into an account number Emily recognized instantly because it was still hers. The one Alexander had insisted they keep joint, just in case, even after she'd begged him to close it during the divorce proceedings. The salary wasn't extravagant by executive standards, but it was steady, enough to have quietly covered her rent, her groceries, the electric bill that always seemed to spike in winter. She had assumed those deposits were from sporadic freelance payments she'd forgotten to track. She'd never questioned them too deeply because questioning would have meant thinking about him, and thinking about Alexander Park was a luxury her heart could no longer afford. The realization landed like a physical blow. This wasn't identity theft. This wasn't a new wife slipping into her old life. This was Alexander, still reaching, still providing, still unable to let go even after she'd walked out and signed the papers with a hand that shook so badly the notary had asked if she needed a moment. Emily felt heat rush to her face, a confusing cocktail of fury, shame, gratitude, and something far more dangerous, longing. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against polished concrete, mumbled thanks, and fled the room before Sarah could offer tissues or another platitude. Outside, the city swallowed her. San Francisco in late autumn was all gray mist and wind that cut through her thin coat. She walked blocks without direction, past food trucks steaming with garlic noodles, past tech workers in hoodies hunched over phones, past the bay glittering coldly under low clouds. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, probably another recruiter, but she ignored it. Memories crowded and uninvited, vivid and merciless, the kind that arrive smelling of salt air and possibility. She remembered the first time she saw Alexander. It was at TechFest 4 years earlier, back when Park Innovations was still called Helix AI and operated out of a cramped loft in the Mission District. She was 24, wearing a thrift store blazer that was slightly too big, clutching a battered laptop full of her senior thesis on ethical AI diagnostics. He was on stage in a plain black t-shirt, no tie, no polish, explaining in quiet, urgent sentences how machine learning could detect early-stage diabetic retinopathy before human eyes caught the signs. His voice had cracked once, not from nerves, but from the weight of what he was saying. People were going blind because hospitals in rural areas couldn't afford specialists, and he intended to fix that. When the Q&A started, Emily's hand shot up before she could talk herself out of it. She asked about bias in the training data. How would the model perform on darker skin tones, on patients from different genetic backgrounds? The room had gone quiet. Most questions had been about valuation or exit strategy. Alexander looked straight at her, really looked, and answered with honesty instead of deflection. Afterward he found her in the hallway, introduced himself like they were equals, asked if she wanted to grab coffee and talk more about her thesis. That coffee lasted 6 hours. By the end of it she was in love, though she wouldn't admit it for another month. They married 18 months later on a windswept beach north of Half Moon Bay. No wedding planner, no 5-tier cake, Just 30 close friends, a local mariachi band Alexander's mother had insisted on, and vows they'd written themselves on the back of old code printouts. I promise to debug our life together, he'd said, voice thick, even when the errors feel impossible to trace. She'd laughed through tears and promised to keep his ambition tethered to kindness. For a while it worked. They rented a tiny house in Pacifica so they could hear the ocean at night. She joined Helix AI as lead engineer. He worked 18-hour days but always came home to her, smelling of coffee and solder. They dreamed aloud about children, about a future where the company's success meant more time, not less. Then the funding rounds accelerated. Series B became Series C. The loft became a sleek headquarters in Soma. Investors wanted quarterly miracles. Alexander started traveling. Singapore, Berlin, Dubai, chasing partnerships that would scale their AI to millions of patients. Emily stayed behind, architecting the core models, mentoring junior devs, keeping the lights on while he chased the horizon. She got pregnant almost by accident during one of his rare weekends home. They cried together on the bathroom floor, terrified and ecstatic. For 6 weeks she carried the secret like a fragile flame, imagining nursery colors and tiny onesies printed with binary hearts. The miscarriage came at 14 weeks, sudden and brutal. One night the cramps were mild. By morning she was in the staring at an ultrasound screen that showed only silence. Alexander flew back from London that same day, eyes red from lack of sleep and guilt. They buried the grief separately, he in work, she in silence. She stopped going to the office, worked remotely, then barely worked at all. The house in Pacifica felt too big, too quiet. When she finally told him she couldn't keep living like this, half ghost, half wife, he didn't fight. He just nodded, said he understood, signed where the lawyer pointed. She left with 2 suitcases and the conviction that love, no matter how bright, could not survive on intermittent weekends and promises deferred. Now, 2 years later, she discovered he had never truly let her go. That night she sat cross-legged on her studio apartment floor, exposed brick, one window overlooking a narrow alley, rent paid partly by those mysterious deposits, and opened her banking app for the first time in months. Every transaction was there. Rent wired on the first, grocery transfers she'd assumed were refunds, even the occasional splurge on books or concert tickets she'd told herself she'd earned freelancing. Each one labeled vaguely as consulting fee. She cried until her throat ached, not only from betrayal but from the terrible tenderness of it. He hadn't wanted credit. He hadn't wanted her back on strings. He'd just wanted her to be okay. The next morning she emailed Sarah, attached a scan of her driver's license and the divorce decree, asked for a meeting with whoever was responsible for the Mrs. Park record. The reply came within an hour. Mr. Park has requested a personal meeting. He's available tomorrow at 3 p.m. in his office. Please confirm. Emily stared at the screen until the letters swam. She typed, confirmed, before she could talk herself out of it. The executive floor smelled faintly of cedar and bergamot, his cologne, unchanged. The receptionist, a young man named Leo who had started after her time, smiled without recognition and waved her through. Alexander's office hadn't changed much. Same long walnut desk, same wall of living moss, same view of the bay now shrouded in fog. He stood at the window, back to her, shoulders tense under a charcoal sweater. When he turned, the years showed, silver threading his temples, deeper lines around his eyes, but the gaze was the same one that had found her in a crowded conference hallway and refused to look away. They didn't speak immediately. The silence stretched, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally he gestured to the leather chairs. She sat. He remained standing, as though movement might shatter the moment. I never meant for you to find out like this, he began, voice low and rough. I thought if I kept my distance, if I just made sure the basics were covered, it would be enough. That you'd never know. Emily's throat tightened. Why? He exhaled, ran a hand through his hair. Because I broke us. The miscarriage, the travel, the way I kept saying, soon, when you asked for time. I knew you left because you had to protect yourself. I didn't want to take that from you too. But I couldn't. His voice cracked. I couldn't stop caring. So I found a way to help without asking for anything back. She felt the anger rise again, cleaner this time. You didn't trust me to survive on my own. I didn't trust myself to live knowing you might not. He met her eyes. Every time the board cheered a new milestone, I thought of you alone in that apartment, paying bills I should have helped with years ago. The guilt was louder than any applause. Emily looked down at her hands, twisting the simple silver ring she still wore on her right hand. Not a wedding band anymore, just a reminder of promises once kept. I used that money, she admitted quietly. I hated that I needed it, but I did. I know. I saw the statements. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. You bought that blue sweater you always wanted. The one from the shop on Valencia. I was glad. Tears burned behind her eyes. She hadn't realized he still noticed small things about her. They talked for hours. Haltingly at first, then in a rush. He told her about therapy, about learning to say no to investors, about nights he sat in hotel rooms staring at old photos instead of pitch decks. She told him about freelance rejections, about teaching herself new frameworks at 2 a.m., about the nights she drove to the ocean just to hear something louder than her thoughts. They laughed once, when she described accidentally applying glitter eyeliner before a video interview, and the sound felt like sunlight breaking through fog. By the time the office lights dimmed automatically, Emily felt something shift inside her chest, not forgiveness exactly, but space. Space where anger had been, space where curiosity lived. She stood. I still want the job, she said. On my terms. Emily Thompson. No special treatment. Alexander nodded slowly. HR will reopen the process tomorrow. You'll interview like everyone else. She paused at the door. Thank you, she whispered. For the money, and for not giving up on me. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was barely audible. I never could. The weeks that followed were strange and fragile. Emily went through 4 more rounds, coding challenges, system design sessions, team fit interviews. She earned every nod, every impressive. When the offer came, it was standard, competitive salary, equity, benefits. No ghost consultant title. She accepted on a Tuesday afternoon, signed digitally while sitting on her fire escape with a cup of chamomile tea, watching fog roll over the rooftops. Her first day she walked in wearing the blue sweater he'd noticed, hair pulled back, nerves electric. Colleagues were kind but curious, whispers followed her through the open plan floor. She ignored them, focused on the onboarding laptop, the welcome email from her new manager, the project brief waiting in her inbox. At lunch she ate alone at a window table, watching engineers play ping-pong in the atrium below. Then Alexander appeared. Not at her table, but across the atrium, speaking to a group of interns. Their eyes met for a second. He gave the smallest nod, the barest smile. She returned it. It wasn't reconciliation. It was acknowledgement. A beginning. Months passed in quiet increments. She shipped features that reached hospitals in 3 continents. He began leaving the office at 7 instead of 11. Sometimes they crossed paths in the elevator, brief, polite exchanges about weather or deadlines. Once, during a company-wide hackathon, their teams ended up collaborating on the same floor. At 3 a.m., bleary-eyed over cold pizza, he handed her a fresh coffee without a word. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. The moment lingered, warm and dangerous. One Friday in early spring she found a handwritten note tucked under her keyboard. Conference room 12. 6 p.m. A. Her pulse thundered. She almost didn't go. But curiosity. And something deeper. 1. He was waiting with takeout from the Thai place they used to love. Candles lit on the long table, city lights glittering beyond the glass. No grand gestures, no music. Just food, quiet, and him. I've been trying to give you space, he said. But I miss you. Not the version of us before everything broke. The version we could be now. If you want that. Emily sat across from him. The rain had stopped. Moonlight pooled on the floor. She reached for a spring roll, took a bite, chewed slowly. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. She looked at him. Really looked. The man who had once carried the weight of the world on his shoulders now carried only himself, lighter, humbler. We start slow, she said. Therapy. Honesty. No more ghost payments. He laughed softly. Deal. They ate in companionable silence, then talked until the building's cleaning crew arrived. When they left together, he offered his hand. She took it. Not as husband and wife. Not yet. Just as two people stepping carefully towards something new. Outside, the city smelled of wet pavement and possibility. Emily breathed deeply, feeling, for the first time in years, that the future might hold more than survival. It might hold healing. It might hold them. And somewhere in the distance, the fog began to lift.